So with that said, I'm going to start it off, of course, on a positive note with the new Vicious Rumors titled The Devil's Asylum. So let me just start this off by saying this is an incredible album. 2025, folks, has been a tremendous year for heavy metal. For me personally, the albums that came out this year as a collective group are so much better than last year for me. I think that we've had so many great releases. There have been so many great albums that are basically an album of the year candidate. It's going to be very difficult for me to pick, my top album of the year, or even top 10, or even top 20 or 30 for that matter. Vicious Rumors, of course, is another album. This new album, Devil's Asylum, is another album that's going to make that more difficult because, number one, this is one of the best albums the band, in my opinion, has ever put out, and it is an album of the year candidate for this show. But the album is absolutely incredible and definitely one of the best the band has ever put out. Now, I've loved the Vicious Rumors for years. They have been definitely one of my favorite power metal bands to come out of the United States. And for the most part, over the course of, close to 20 years, they've been one of the most consistent bands in the scene. Now, many people have always, in my opinion, people have always overlooked Vicious Rumors. And I'm going to give people a little bit of a background on the band in case you've never listened to them. But the band originated in the San Francisco Bay Area, interestingly enough. But I've always thought they've been overlooked because the Bay Area back in the 80s, that is where the big thrash movement started. So you had all these thrash bands, this huge, thriving thrash metal scene, and then you have this power metal band that's also playing there that I think everybody focused so much on, like bands like Metallica and Exodus and all these other great bands from that area, that I've always thought Vicious Rumors as a band has been overlooked as time has gone on. But the band started out on Shrapnel Records. Shrapnel Records, of course, headed by Mike Varney. And it was basically a label that had a lot of, guitar shredders on it and a lot of stuff like that going on. And it was a great label to really be a part of. And they had their debut album come out in 1985. Now, the 85 album was called Soldiers of the Night. The singer on it, Gary St. Pierre, that was the only album he sang on. Gary St. Pierre actually sang in the band Hawaii, which, ironically enough, is a band formed, one of the first bands that Marty Friedman formed. Many of you know Marty, of course, from Megadeth. But Gary sang in the first album. Jeff Thorpe, of course, the guy that's been in the band in its entirety, the entire time. He's like and I think Larry Howe played on the first album as well. But Jeff Thorpe has been the mainstay in the band, basically the guru behind the band and its existence. And great guy. I've had Jeff on my radio show in the past. Really cool dude to talk to. But Jeff Thorpe, the guitar player, was also playing guitar with Vinnie Moore. A very young Vinnie Moore played on the Soldiers of the Night album. Vinnie Moore left the band, I believe, shortly after the album came out. But the album is really cool. It's very raw. It's definitely more guitar shred oriented. And they really didn't refine their songwriting until they came, and recorded their second album called Digital Dictator. Digital Dictator is considered one of the band's best albums, and it introduced, in my opinion, one of the most forgotten and underrated heavy metal vocalists of all time, Carl Albert. Carl Albert, for me, he's actually one of my favorite singers of all time. And sadly, he had passed away in the early mid 90s. And that's why a lot of people don't talk about him anymore. But Carl Albert is an incredible vocalist. He sang in a band called the Ruffians. I actually have the compilation of a lot of the songs he did with them, along with a band called Villain. But he sang on that album, Digital Dictator, and then sang on the subsequent album after that when the band was signed to a major label. So they had a self-titled album that came out when they were signed, I believe it was to Atlantic Records. And then they had what most people universally, I would say most of the fans would say is their favorite album, and it's an album called Welcome to the Ball, which, of the early era of the band, I would say that's probably, it's really hard. It's between that and Digital Dictator. But this band, this power metal band, had such, it doesn't really get any better Power metal doesn't get much better than Vicious Rumors from here in the States. It just doesn't. And so those albums, those first 4 albums are absolutely incredible. They had an album called Word of Mouth, which was the last studio album Carl Albert sang on. They had a live album that was, recorded in Japan as well. And then Carl passed away, and they did a tribute album, which had, a live like bootleg show, and had some studio tracks on it as well. So anybody, if you like old school classic power metal, I would check that out because it doesn't get much better than the early era of this band. And still today, these albums sound great, even in modern times. I mean, they've really held up well since then. And then after that, you had 3 albums that really were kind of a letdown. I mean, they weren't to the quality of the early stuff. They had 3 records. One of them was called Cyberchrist, which was decent, actually. And they had 3 albums that were kind of, they released them in the late 90s, and I think one came out in 2000, 2001. I think it was Sadistic Symphony. But those 3 records, to me, are very forgettable. I was never really a big fan of those albums themselves. And then the band finally found itself again in 2006 with an album called Warball, which featured Hellstar's James Rivera on vocals for that one record. And Warball, I think, is great. It's like a really great return to form. But it's also the start of the band pretty much for the last 20 years being extremely consistent. Because I would say Vicious Rumors, ever since that album came out, they've been one of the most consistent bands out there. You had Electric Punishment, Concussion Protocol, Razorback Killers. I mean, they had some great... They've had some great albums over the last 19 years. And each one of these albums has been incredible. And this one, for me, again, this is one of the best albums this band has ever put out. And, unfortunately, I don't see a lot of people talking about it. I don't know why that is. I've seen a little bit of buzz on social media, but I don't see very many people talking about this record. But I can tell you, they have a new vocalist who has the stage name Chalice. And this guy's vocals are incredible. This album has a lot of really great vocal harmonies that this guy does. And when I first listened to this, and I would suggest you guys go check the song out, the song that really caught me, every album I listen to always has like that one track that you're like, man, that song is awesome. Then you just keep listening to it over and over again. And then at least for me, after listening to that same song that I absolutely really catches me, then, after I listen to that song multiple times, then I get into the rest of the album. But the song that really, really hit me pretty hard and I thought was really, really great is called Crack the Sky in Half. And the vocal melodies that Chalice sings on that song and the vocal harmonies on that song, I was blown away by that. And this record, again, if you've liked what the band has put out since 2006, or even if you like the old stuff, I think you're really going to like this album if you have not listened to it. But generally speaking, this is an album of the year for me. Bloodbath is like a classic, kick-ass, really heavy, really fast song. But this guy as a singer is really, really great. And that's the one thing I got to say about Jeff Thorpe is that he has always found great musicians to play with. I like when I listen to any of the albums they've had, a lot of these singers that he's brought in, every one of them has been very, very good. Even the album Cyberchrist, I'm really not a big fan of that record in general, but the singer on the album, that singer was incredible. So he has always brought in quality musicians and has always had really talented guys playing in the band with him. And I got to give him credit for keeping at it, for, these last, 40 plus years. But I really think if I were to take this album and rank it in their discography, it would easily be probably top 3, maybe top 4 of the new era albums. From 2006 on, this is actually my favorite one, and that's hard to say because man, I love like the album Concussion Protocol, for example. Think is ridiculously awesome. So this record is my favorite out of those, but it's pretty close with the other ones. So I think Vicious Rumors really hit the nail on the head. My favorite songs on the album, and I urge you to check these tracks out. The first song, Bloodbath, I think is incredibly awesome. Crack the Sky in Half, song 3 on this record, is absolutely incredible. There's a song called Abusement Park that I think is very, very good. Boring Day in Hell is a pretty interesting song as well. Actually, that's probably my second favorite song on the record. And then the last song, The Devil's Asylum, is incredible. But the whole album is consistent. There is not a bad song on this record, in my opinion. And I'll be honest, I'm really blown away by this album. This is an Album of the Year candidate. This is probably one of the best albums. This is easily one of the best albums Vicious Rumors has ever recorded. And I definitely, highly recommend it to all of you. Hey, it's Tony here from the Metal Command Show. I want to thank you for watching this portion of the program. Since 1998, I have hosted the show, which started off as a radio program and is now into the podcast format. So I want to thank you for watching and or listening. And if you want to support the program, hit the subscribe button, hit that little bell to be notified anytime I do post any content. A lot of you have been supporting the show and really helping this show grow, and I cannot do it without all of you. So with that said, thanks for watching. Stay metal.